If she dies tonight, her blood is on your hands." Dr. Evander screamed, his cheek ground into the jagged asphalt. "Shut up," Officer Spencer snarled, digging his knee into the surgeon's spine. Cold steel ratcheted tightly around Evander's wrists, biting into the nerves that saved lives. "I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon. A woman's chest is open on my table. Look at my ID." Evander choked on the rein. Spencer laughed cruelly. "A doctor? Yeah, right." He didn't know the dying woman on that table was his police chief's wife. The crystal ballroom of the Sunfield Ritz-Carlton was a blinding kaleidoscope of diamonds, silk, and the intoxicating scent of expensive champagne. It was the annual Sunfield Medical Endowment Gala, an event where the city's wealthiest elite gathered to write exorbitant checks and pat themselves on the back. Dr. Evander Cole stood near the towering ice sculpture at the center of the room, looking immaculate in a tailored, midnight blue tuxedo. At 38, he was the youngest chief of cardiothoracic surgery in the state's history, a black man who had shattered every glass ceiling the medical establishment had placed above him. He held a crystal flute of sparkling water. He never drank alcohol when he was on call, even nominally, and politely listened as a billionaire real estate developer droned on about his golf handicap. Evander's mind, however, was light years away. He was unconsciously flexing his long, dexterous fingers. His hands were his life's work. They were insured for $10 million. They had bypassed blocked arteries, transplanted hearts into dying teenagers, and held the fragile, beating essence of human life while the rest of the world slept. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a freak spring storm was battering the city of Sunfield. Lightning spiderwebbed across the black sky, followed by thunder that rattled the champagne flutes on the silver trays of passing waiters. Evander politely excused himself from the developer, seeking a moment of quiet in the marble-lined hallway. He pulled his phone from his tuxedo pocket to check the time, 10:15 p.m. He was just about to head back inside to deliver his keynote address when the device in his palm erupted. It wasn't a standard ringtone. It was a chaotic, high-pitched klaxon, the red line emergency override. It bypassed all silent modes. Evander's heart instantly spiked. He swiped the screen, pressing the phone to his ear. "Evander," a voice cracked through the receiver. It was Gemma, the veteran charge nurse at Sunfield Memorial's Level 1 Trauma Center. Gemma was an institution, a woman who had seen gang wars, industrial explosions, and multi-car pileups without ever raising her voice. But tonight, she was breathless, her words tumbling over one another in a panic. "Tell me you're not drinking. Water only, Gemma. What's coming in?" Evander's posture shifted. The refined gala attendee vanished, instantly replaced by the ruthless, calculating surgeon. Jane Doe, mid-40s, severe blunt force trauma from a high-speed vehicular collision. "Evander, it's a catastrophic type A aortic dissection. The tear starts at the aortic root and extends halfway down the descending arch." "Doctor." Eris cracked her chest in Trauma Bay 1 because she was coding, but the second he saw the aorta, he packed it with gauze and backed away. Evander closed his eyes, visualizing the catastrophic injury. A type A dissection was a nightmare. The inner layer of the body's main artery had torn, and high-pressure blood was surging between the layers of the artery wall, forcing them apart. At any second, the fragile outer layer would rupture entirely, causing the patient to bleed to death internally in less than a minute. "Why didn't Eris initiate bypass?" Evander demanded, already sprinting down the hallway toward the coat check. "The tissue is macerated. It's like wet tissue paper, Evander. Eris says if he clamps it, the whole vessel will disintegrate. It requires a complete arch reconstruction under deep hypothermic circulatory arrest. You are the only surgeon in the state who has successfully performed the Sunfield arch reconstruction. If you don't get your hands in her chest, she is going to die." "Brain perfusion time?" Evander asked, throwing his valet ticket onto the counter, startling the attendant. "Her pressures are bottoming out. We're pushing massive transfusions, but it's like pouring water into a sieve. You have maybe 30 minutes before irreversible brain death, assuming the aorta doesn't completely blow before then." "Who is she?" "We don't know," Gemma shouted over the chaotic background noise of blaring monitors and screaming staff. She had no ID. "But Evander, the circumstances are insane. The paramedics said she was intentionally rammed off the road by an unmarked black SUV during a police chase. The lobby is swarming with brass. We have captains here. Just get here. Tell anesthesia to pack her in ice. Drop her core temperature to 18 degrees Celsius. Drain her blood into the bypass reservoir and stop her heart. Buy me the time. I'm leaving right now. Evander didn't wait for his coat. He sprinted out the revolving doors of the Ritz-Carlton, diving straight into the torrential downpour. The valet, wide-eyed, pulled up Evander's car, a sleek, heavily modified, jet-black Aston Martin DB11. It was an extravagant machine, a gift to himself after his first successful heart transplant. Evander tossed $100 bill to the valet and threw himself into the rich leather interior. His tailored tuxedo was already clinging to his skin, soaked with freezing rain. He slammed the start button, and the twin-turbo V12 engine roared to life with a feral, terrifying scream. He punched the hospital's address into the GPS. The screen flashed a bright, warning red. Severe flooding. Interstate 95 closed. Routing through South Sector. Evander's stomach tightened. The affluent North Sector, where the gala was held, was a world away from the South Sector. Under Chief of Police Edmund Sterling's draconian Operation Iron Net, the South Sector had been turned into a militarized zone. There were checkpoints, aggressive patrols, and a strictly enforced, albeit unconstitutional, curfew. Driving a $200,000 sports car through the heart of the Iron Net at night, while black, was practically begging for a violent confrontation. But Evander had no choice. A woman's chest was cracked open. Her life was counting down in agonizing seconds. He shifted the Aston Martin into track mode, gripping the steering wheel with hands that held the power of life and death. He slammed the accelerator to the floor. The heavy rear tires spun fiercely on the slick, wet pavement before catching traction, launching the vehicle into the stormy night. He wasn't just driving. He was flying a missile through the dark, racing against the Grim Reaper himself. 10 miles away, high above the squalor of the South Sector, Chief of Police Edmund Sterling stood in the soundproof, glass-walled command center of the Sunfield Police Plaza. Edmund was a man carved from ambition and cruelty. With his immaculate silver hair, tailored suits, and a jawline that belonged on a campaign poster, he was widely considered the front-runner for the upcoming mayoral election. But behind the polished exterior, Edmund was a parasite. Operation Iron Net wasn't a crime-fighting initiative. It was a highly lucrative enterprise. Edmund had secretly partnered with a massive private prison conglomerate. For every arrest, for every body processed through the South Sector, Edmund received a substantial kickback deposited into an offshore account. To fuel this machine, he had created an off-the-books task force, a squad of aggressive, morally bankrupt officers who answered only to him. Tonight, however, the master of the Iron Net was sweating through his silk shirt. He stared at the massive digital map on the command center wall, watching GPS blips move through the storm. 3 hours ago, his world had imploded. His wife, Marina, a fiercely intelligent and compassionate investigative journalist, had finally uncovered his offshore ledgers. The argument had been apocalyptic. Marina had stood in their foyer, holding a copied flash drive, her eyes wide with a mixture of disgust and horror. "You aren't protecting this city, Edmund," she had whispered, tears of rage in her eyes. "You are farming human beings for profit. I have everything. The transfers, the bogus arrest quotas, the communications with the prison board. I'm taking this to the state attorney tonight." She had fled in her unassuming, slate-gray Volvo before Edmund could physically stop her. Desperate, terrified of losing his empire and facing federal prison, Edmund had made a fatal, unforgivable decision. He had bypassed official dispatch and radioed his off-the-books task force. "I have a rogue informant heading for the capital with stolen, classified department files. Slate gray Volvo, plates Juliet Victor Niner. Suspect is highly dangerous. Intercept at all costs. Run them off the road if you have to. Retrieve the drive." He hadn't told his men that the informant was his wife. Now, the red phone on Edmund's console began to flash. He snatched it up, his knuckles white. "Sterling." "Chief," the voice of Captain Miller, the head of the corrupt task force, echoed through the receiver. Miller sounded breathless, panicked. We intercepted the target in the south sector. She was weaving through the back alleys to avoid the interstate checkpoints. We clipped her rear quarter panel. Chief, she lost control. She wrapped the Volvo around a concrete bridge pillar at 60 miles an hour. Edmund felt a cold, reptilian thrill. Did you secure the flash drive? We got the drive from her purse. But Chief. Miller's voice cracked. Chief. We ran the plates after the crash. And then we pulled her out of the wreckage. Chief, it's Marina. It's your wife. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath Edmund. The air in the room instantly vanished. A high-pitched ringing echoed in his ears. What did you say? We didn't know. Miller practically screamed. You said it was an informant. She's hurt bad, Chief. Really bad. The paramedics just rushed her to Sunfield Memorial. They said she has massive internal bleeding. A torn aorta. They're calling for a specialist, but the storm is keeping life flight grounded. Edmund dropped the phone. The plastic receiver cracked against the console. The sheer, terrifying irony of the universe had just collapsed onto his shoulders. He had ordered a hit on his own wife to protect his corrupt empire, and now the very storm that usually aided his dark operations was preventing her from getting the care she needed. Get my car, Edmund bellowed to his detail, his voice echoing through the command center. Get me to Sunfield Memorial now. Down in the flooded, neon-lit streets of the South Sector, Officer Spencer Vance sat in his idling patrol cruiser, entirely unaware of the chief's catastrophic mistake. Spencer was a hulking man, bitter and fueled by a toxic cocktail of unearned arrogance and deep-seated prejudice. He had been passed over for the rank of detective 3 times, his personnel file overflowing with excessive force complaints that the Union had barely managed to sweep under the rug. Under the iron net, Spencer was a predator given free rein to hunt. He was part of the perimeter guard tonight, ordered to lock down the 9th Avenue corridor and aggressively stop any suspicious vehicles fleeing the area. Spencer took a sip of lukewarm coffee, watching the torrential rain wash over his windshield. He needed a major bust tonight. He needed a drug runner, a cartel boss, or a weapon smuggler to slap on his captain's desk to demand his gold shield. Suddenly, a low, mechanical howl cut through the sound of the thunder. Spencer sat up straight. A jet-black Aston Martin DB11 tore around the corner, its tires kicking up a massive wave of water. The luxury sports car was doing at least 80 in a 35-mile-per-hour zone. As it flew past the blinding glow of a street lamp, Spencer caught a split-second glimpse of the driver. A black man, wearing a tuxedo, driving a $200,000 car out of the South Sector like the devil himself was on his heels. In Spencer's twisted, racist logic, the narrative wrote itself instantly. High-level cartel boss fleeing a hit, or a thief who just jacked a billionaire's ride. There was no other explanation in his mind. Spencer smiled, a cruel, hungry grin. He slammed his hand onto the siren console. The cruiser's light bar erupted in a blinding, strobing frenzy of red and blue. He jammed the heavy police interceptor into drive, the tires screaming against the wet asphalt, and launched himself into the pursuit. Dispatch, this is Unit 4, Bravo, Spencer barked into his shoulder mic, his heart pounding with adrenaline. I am in high-speed pursuit of a stolen black Aston Martin, heading northbound on 9th. Suspect is driving recklessly. Initiating felony stop. Dr. Evander Cole saw the explosion of red and blue lights fill his rearview mirror, and a profound, agonizing groan ripped from his throat. He slammed his palm against the leather-wrapped steering wheel, the horn blaring uselessly into the storm. He glanced at the digital clock on the dashboard. 10:28 p.m. Marina Sterling's aorta was tearing wider with every single beat of her heart. Gemma had told him they had 30 minutes. He was already burning through 10 of them. Every logical, medical instinct screamed at him to keep his foot on the gas. Lead the cop to the hospital, his brain urged. Pull into the emergency bay. The trauma team will rush out, and the cop will see the truth. But the brutal reality of the world outside his windshield crashed down upon him. This was the South Sector. This was Edmund Sterling's iron net. Evander knew the horrifying statistics. He had operated on the victims of these routine traffic stops, young men bleeding out from gunshot wounds, because they reached for their registration too quickly, because their cell phones looked like weapons in the dark. If he ran, The officer would use a pit maneuver to flip his car at 80 miles an hour. If he ran, the officer would draw his weapon and fire through the rear window. If Evander died on this wet road, the woman waiting for him on the operating table was unequivocally doomed. Praying to whatever God was listening, Evander made the hardest decision of his life. He hit his hazard lights, firmly pressed the brakes, and swerved into the flooded parking lot of an abandoned, graffitied strip mall. The Aston Martin hydroplaned slightly before coming to a complete, shuddering halt under a flickering, broken streetlight. The rain was falling in blinding sheets, pounding against the roof of the car like gravel. The police cruiser slammed into park directly behind him, the spotlight instantly kicking on, flooding the Aston Martin's cabin with blinding, interrogative white light. Evander didn't hesitate. He knew the drill to survive. He killed the engine, rolled down his window, and immediately threw the heavy electronic key fob out onto the wet pavement. He thrust both of his empty hands straight out the window, into the freezing rain. "Officer!" Evander screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice fighting the roar of the storm. "I am a doctor. I am Dr. Evander Cole, Chief of Surgery at Sunfield Memorial. This is a catastrophic medical emergency. I have a patient dying on my operating table right now." Officer Spencer stepped out of his cruiser, ignoring the rain soaking his uniform. He drew his heavy service pistol, leveling it squarely at Evander's head. Spencer couldn't see a doctor. He saw a target. He saw his promotion. "Shut your mouth. Keep your hands out the window." Spencer roared over the PA system. "Use your left hand to open the door from the outside. Step out slowly." "Please," Evander begged, water running down his face, ruining his expensive tuxedo. He carefully reached down, popped the door handle, and stepped out into the ankle-deep water of the parking lot. "Look in the passenger seat. My hospital ID is right there. Call dispatch. Call Sunfield Memorial. Ask for charge nurse Gemma. If I am not in that hospital in 15 minutes, a woman's heart will explode. Turn around and face away from me. Interlace your fingers behind your head." Spencer shouted, advancing quickly, his gun tracking Evander's chest. "I am complying, but you have to listen to me." Evander turned around, lifting his incredibly valuable hands to the back of his head. "In the trunk, I have a sterile surgical kit with customized bypass clamps. Look at the equipment." Spencer closed the distance in 3 long strides. He didn't holster his weapon. Instead, he aggressively grabbed Evander by the collar of his tuxedo jacket and violently slammed him face first into the wet, cold metal of the Aston Martin's roof. Pain flared in Evander's jaw, but a deeper, much more visceral terror seized him. His hands, as Spencer holstered his weapon and forcefully grabbed Evander's arms to wrench them down and behind his back, Evander instinctively tensed his shoulders, trying to prevent his fingers from being crushed against the car. It was a purely protective, involuntary reaction from a man whose entire existence was predicated on fine motor skills. "Stop resisting, you piece of trash," Spencer bellowed, his ego interpreting the flinch as an attack. "I'm not resisting. I'm a surgeon. Watch my hands," Evander cried out, panic finally lacing his voice. Spencer kicked Evander's legs apart, sweeping his right boot hard against Evander's calf. Evander lost his footing and went down hard, his knees smashing into the flooded asphalt. "Get your face on the asphalt, now." Spencer drove his heavy, knee-padded leg directly into Evander's spine, pinning him to the ground. The freezing, oily water of the parking lot rushed into Evander's mouth. "If she dies tonight, her blood is on your hands," Dr. Evander screamed, coughing up water and tasting copper. "Shut up," Spencer snarled. He grabbed Evander's wrists, violently jerking them together. Cold steel handcuffs ratcheted tightly, the metal teeth biting deeply into Evander's skin, dangerously compressing the delicate radial nerves. "I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon. A woman's chest is open on my table. Look at my ID," Evander choked. Spencer laughed, hauling Evander to his feet like a sack of garbage. "A doctor? Yeah, right. Doctors don't drive like lunatics through the South Sector. Let's see what you're really carrying." Spencer shoved Evander roughly against the side of the cruiser. Then, the officer walked over to the Aston Martin. He reached into the passenger seat and picked up Evander's tuxedo jacket, which held his hospital badge. Spencer barely glanced at it before tossing it carelessly into a puddle. Next, Spencer grabbed Evander's phone from the center console. The screen was lit up. It was Gemma, calling again. "Answer it," Evander pleaded from the police car. "Just press answer. That's the hospital." Spencer looked at the phone, then looked at Evander with eyes full of malicious contempt. "I don't talk to cartel lawyers," Spencer sneered. He dropped the phone onto the asphalt and deliberately crushed it beneath his steel-toed boot, shattering the glass and silencing Gemma's frantic calls. Finally, Spencer popped the trunk. He found Evander's specialized, sterile titanium surgical kit. He opened it, revealing the gleaming, razor-sharp scalpels and rib spreaders. Well, Spencer called out, holding up a heavy steel rib retractor. "Look at this. Looks like a torture kit to me. Or maybe tools for chopping up bodies. You're going away for a long time, buddy." "Those are surgical instruments," Evander screamed, tears of absolute, agonizing frustration mixing with the rain on his face. "You are killing a woman right now. You are committing murder." Spencer ignored him. He walked over, grabbed Evander by the scruff of his neck, and shoved him brutally into the claustrophobic cages in back seat of the police cruiser. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing Evander in a concrete cage of terrifying helplessness. Through the wire mesh, Evander fell back against the hard plastic seat, his bound hands screaming in pain. He looked at the red digital clock on Spencer's dash camera. On 8:05 p.m. He closed his eyes and wept. He wept not for the destruction of his car, or the agonizing pain in his wrists, or the profound indignity of the arrest. He wept because he knew, with chilling medical certainty, that the woman lying on the steel table miles away was bleeding out, completely unaware that her only savior was locked in a metal cage, drowning in the hubris of a corrupt cop. Trauma Bay 1 at Sunfield Memorial was a chilling portrait of organized desperation. The room smelled of sharp metallic blood, sterilized plastic, and the bitter tang of ozone from the defibrillator that had already been used twice. In the center of the blinding surgical lights lay Marina Sterling, her identity still unknown to the medical staff. Her pale, lifeless chest was splayed wide open, held apart by heavy stainless steel rib retractors. Dr. Aris, a seasoned trauma surgeon whose scrubs were soaked through with dark crimson, stood frozen over the massive, pulsing cavity. His gloved hands hovered above the human heart, shaking slightly. "Her core temp is at 20 degrees Celsius, the lead anesthesiologist called out, his eyes glued to a towering rack of monitors that beeped in a discordant, terrifying rhythm. "We've induced the hypothermic coma. Heart function is effectively paused on the bypass machine, but the pressure in the descending aorta is still volatile. The tear is widening, Aris. We are leaking half a liter a minute into the pleural cavity." "I can't clamp it," Aris shouted, his voice cracking behind his surgical mask. "I told you, the tissue is macerated. It's like trying to suture wet tissue paper. The moment I apply a cross clamp, the entire arch is going to disintegrate, and she'll exsanguinate on the table." "Where the hell is Evander?" Gemma, the charge nurse, stood at the wall-mounted phone, dialing Evander's cell for the 5th time. Her knuckles were white. She listened to the dead, empty ringtone before it automatically rolled over to voicemail. "Straight to voicemail," Gemma said, slamming the receiver down. A cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. Evander never, ever ignored an emergency call. Even if he was driving, his car had an integrated comm system. Something was catastrophically wrong. "Brain perfusion time is critical," the anesthesiologist warned, adjusting a massive IV line pushing frozen saline and blood products into Marina's veins. "At this temperature, we can theoretically protect her brain from oxygen deprivation for another 22 minutes. If Evander isn't here to perform the arch reconstruction and get her off bypass before that clock runs out, she will suffer irreversible neurologic death. She'll be a vegetable, if she survives at all." "Keep pushing the O negative," Aris ordered blindly, wiping sweat from his forehead with his shoulder. "Just keep her floating until he gets here. He's coming. He has to be." Miles away, the red digital clock on Officer Spencer's dashboard clicked to 10:41 p.m. In the back of the cruiser, Evander was living a nightmare worse than any trauma room he had ever managed. The heavy steel handcuffs were ratcheted down so tightly that they had cut through the first layer of his skin. But the external pain was nothing compared to the deep, terrifying numbness creeping into his hands. The cuffs were compressing the radial and ulnar nerves in his wrists. As a surgeon, Evander knew exactly what was happening on a microscopic level. The ischemic pressure was starving the nerve bundles of oxygen. First came the pins and needles, then a burning sensation, and now, a heavy, dead numbness was wrapping around his fingers. His million-dollar hands, the hands that were the only things capable of saving the woman on Dr. Eris's table, were going functionally paralyzed. "Officer, please," Evander choked out, leaning forward until his forehead hit the wire mesh separating the front and back seats. "I am begging you, as a human being. The cuffs are causing nerve damage. I am a surgeon. If my hands lose fine motor control, my career is over. Loosen them, just one notch. I'm not going anywhere." Spencer sat in the driver's seat, casually tapping his fingers against the steering wheel to the rhythm of the pouring rain. He adjusted his rearview mirror to look at Evander's desperate, tear-streaked face. "You should have thought about your precious hands before you stole a car and resisted arrest, buddy." Spencer sneered, entirely devoid of empathy. "I didn't steal it. Check the registration in the glove box." Evander screamed, his voice hoarse. "It's registered to Dr. Evander Cole. Call the hospital. You are letting a woman die just to stroke your own ego." Spencer rolled his eyes. He reached out and turned the dial on the cruiser's radio, blasting heavy rock music to drown out Evander's pleas. He put the cruiser into gear, taking his sweet, agonizing time navigating out of the flooded parking lot. He drove at a crawl, 20 miles per hour under the speed limit, relishing the power he held over the man in the back. Suddenly, the heavy metal music was interrupted by a sharp, high-priority beep from the police dispatch radio. All units. Priority 1 alert." The dispatcher's voice rang out, tense and urgent. "Stand by for Chief Sterling on a dedicated channel. All IronNet Task Force units. This is a code red." Spencer frowned, turning down the music. A code red from the chief himself was unheard of. "This is Chief Sterling." The authoritative, panicked voice of Edmund echoed through the cabin. "My wife, Marina Sterling, was involved in a severe collision in the South Sector 30 minutes ago. She is currently at Sunfield Memorial Trauma Center in critical condition. Any unit that witnessed a gray Volvo crashing near 5th Street, or any unit with knowledge of the incident, report to the hospital immediately." Evander heard the radio. He kicked the back of Spencer's seat violently. "That's her. The woman from the crash. That's the patient I was called in for. It's your chief's wife. She's the one with the torn aorta. Take me there now." Spencer froze. The words processed slowly through his thick skull. The chief's wife? A car crash? But in Spencer's rigid, paranoid worldview, the man in the back seat was a criminal trying to play a con. How would a car thief know medical details about the chief's wife unless he was involved in the hit? "Oh, you're good," Spencer muttered to himself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "You're real good. You hear a dispatch call and try to spin it. You probably caused the crash, you piece of garbage." Instead of speeding up or heading toward the hospital, Spencer reached down and completely muted the dispatch radio. He turned the heavy metal music back up, effectively blinding and deafening himself to the reality of the situation. "We're going to the precinct," Spencer yelled over the music. "And you're going to rot." Evander collapsed back against the hard plastic seat, his bound hands completely numb, a silent scream tearing his throat to shreds. Edmund stormed Sunfield Memorial's ER with his tactical team, demanding to see his wife. Gemma blocked him at the triage desk, revealing the grim truth. Dr. Eris couldn't fix the catastrophic tear, and Dr. Evander Cole, the only surgeon capable of the procedure, was missing. He had to drive through the South Sector, Gemma stated flatly, staring Edmund down. "Through your IronNet checkpoints." Edmund's blood ran cold. The brutal reality of his own corruption slammed into him. He immediately ordered his communications lieutenant to pull the city's traffic surveillance grid. Within seconds, they found the ping. The security footage showed Evander's Aston Martin abandoned in a flooded parking lot. Beside it lay a smashed phone and scattered surgical tools. The dispatch logs confirmed the nightmare. Officer Spencer Vance, Unit 4, Bravo, had initiated a felony traffic stop there 20 minutes ago. The horrific irony struck Edmund like a physical blow. The aggressive machine he had built to farm innocent people for profit had just swallowed the only man who could save his dying wife. "Track his cruiser's GPS," Edmund bellowed, panic tearing at his throat, as he realized they were running out of time before Marina suffered permanent brain death. "Override his comms. If that ignorant son of a bitch doesn't answer, tell every unit to intercept him and run him off the road." At the 12th precinct, Spencer Vance dragged a numb, exhausted Evander into the booking area, fully expecting praise for his major bust. Instead, he found Desk Sergeant Harris white as a sheet, clutching the emergency red phone. "The chief blew out our console with an emergency override," Harris stammered, looking at Spencer with absolute terror. "He's tracking your GPS. He wants your suspect at the Sunfield Memorial Ambulance Bay right now." Spencer's ego flared. Blind to the truth, he assumed he had nabbed a high-level cartel target the chief wanted to personally interrogate. He shoved Evander violently back into the cruiser and sped toward the hospital. When Spencer slammed into park at the brightly lit ambulance bay, Chief Sterling and a dozen tactical officers were already waiting. "Got him secured right here, Chief," Spencer yelled proudly, dragging the soaked, handcuffed surgeon out into the blinding rain. Edmund froze. He didn't see a cartel boss. He saw the ruined tuxedo and the restrained, life-saving hands of the city's greatest surgeon. Without a word, Edmund lunged forward, driving his fist into Spencer's face with bone-shattering force. As Spencer collapsed to the pavement, bleeding and dazed, tactical officers rushed forward to frantically unlock Evander's cuffs. Evander collapsed to his knees, his freed arms dropping uselessly to his sides. Gemma burst through the ER doors, dropping beside him. "Evander, can you feel your fingers?" she cried. Evander stared at his pale, trembling, deeply bruised hands as excruciating pain began to aggressively recirculate. He glanced at the wall clock through the glass doors. 11:02 p.m. 47 minutes had passed since the heart was stopped. "I don't know," Evander whispered, his voice laced with absolute dread. "But we have to try. Get me to the scrub room." The scrub room outside Trauma Bay 1 felt as cold as a morgue. Evander stood over the stainless steel sink, the motion sensor faucet blasting scalding water over his forearms. Gemma stood beside him, her hands hovering, ready to assist. Evander stared at his hands. They didn't look like his own. The deep, purple indentations from Spencer's handcuffs circled his wrists like bruised bracelets. The skin was mottled, pale, and slightly swollen. As the blood violently forced its way back into the ischemic tissues, a blinding, white-hot agony shot up his arms, so intense it made his vision blur. It was like 1,000 burning needles being driven under his fingernails simultaneously. "Evander," Gemma said softly, holding up a sterile, bristled sponge. "You don't have to do this. Eris can try. Eris will kill her." Evander grunted through clenched teeth, forcing his hands under the scalding water. He couldn't feel the heat of the water on his fingertips. That terrified him more than the pain. The fine motor nerves, the complex web of sensory input that allowed him to feel the microscopic tension of a silk suture, were functionally deadened. "My fingers," Evander gasped, squeezing his eyes shut. "They feel like they're made of lead. I can't feel the water." 51 minutes, Gemma stated, her voice trembling slightly. It was the longest brain perfusion time they had ever pushed in Sunfield Memorial's history. Marina Sterling's brain was actively starving. "If we don't restore blood flow in the next 10 minutes, the brainstem will begin to necrose." Evander opened his eyes. The pain was secondary. The injustice of the night was secondary. The only thing that mattered was the broken machine of flesh and blood lying on the table beyond the glass. He snatched the surgical sponge from Gemma with clumsy, uncoordinated fingers. He aggressively scrubbed his skin until it was raw, fighting through the searing nerve pain through sheer, unadulterated willpower. "Gown me," Evander ordered. He burst through the doors of Trauma Bay 1. The room was a chaotic symphony of blaring alarms and shouting voices, but to Evander, it instantly fell silent. He stepped up to the operating table, his eyes locking onto the massive, gaping cavity of Marina Sterling's chest. Dr. Eris stepped back, his eyes wide above his mask, his chest heaving. Evander, thank God. The tissue is completely macerated. The tear is extending proximally. If you clamp it, it's going to turn to dust. Evander looked down. It was a disaster. The aorta, usually a thick, rubbery conduit, looked like wet, shredded tissue paper. I need a 24mm Dacron graft, pre-clotted, Evander barked, his voice carrying the absolute, icy authority of a man taking control of his domain. Give me 4O proline sutures, on a large needle. And Gemma, I need you on my right side. I need you to guide the needle driver. My grip strength is compromised. Gemma stepped up, her eyes locking with his. She understood exactly what he was asking. It was a terrifying risk. Evander reached out to take the heavy titanium needle driver from the scrub tech. His fingers closed around it, but the tactile feedback was missing. He had to look at his hand to ensure he was actually holding the instrument. It felt as if he were trying to operate underwater while wearing thick, heavy winter gloves. We are bypassing the clamp, Evander announced. The room gasped. The tissue won't hold it. We are going to suture the graft directly into the open, bleeding vessel under deep circulatory arrest, and then we will slowly reintroduce flow. It's the only way. It was a technique Evander had theorized, but never performed under such catastrophic conditions. He moved his hands into the chest cavity. The first stitch was agonizing. Evander drove the curved needle through the fragile remnants of the aorta, aiming for a millimeter of healthy tissue. His hand trembled violently. The nerve damage from the handcuffs made his muscles twitch uncontrollably. The needle slipped. Damit. Evander hissed. I've got you, Gemma whispered. She placed her steady, gloved hands directly over Evander's, stabilizing his wrists. She became his anchor. Together, they moved, stitch by agonizing stitch. Evander had to rely entirely on his visual depth perception and years of muscle memory, completely bypassing the absent sense of touch. Sweat poured down his face, soaking his surgical cap. The pain in his wrists was a roaring fire, but he pushed it into a dark corner of his mind. 58 minutes, the anesthesiologist called out, his voice laced with dread. Core temp is holding, but we are entering the red zone. Neurological viability dropping by the second. Suture, Evander commanded, his voice a low, terrifying growl. He moved faster, his brain overriding his broken body. He attached the synthetic Dacron tube, reconstructing the entire arch of the aorta, securing it with a complex parachute technique. Every movement required a monumental, exhausting effort of concentration. Last stitch, Evander said, tying off the proline with a knot that felt impossibly clumsy to his numb fingers. Eris, get ready to release the venous line. Anesthesia, prepare to rewarm. Flow is open, Eris said, adjusting the massive tubes of the bypass machine. Warm, oxygenated blood suddenly rushed back into Marina Sterling's reconstructed aorta. The Dacron graft swelled, taking the immense pressure of the circulatory system. Evander held his breath, staring at the synthetic tube. He waited for the devastating spray of arterial blood that would signal a failed graft. He waited for the tissue to disintegrate. 10 seconds passed. Nothing. The graft held perfectly. The suture line was watertight. It's holding, Eris whispered, disbelief coloring his voice. My God, Evander, it's holding. Don't celebrate yet, Evander said, stepping back from the table, his arms dropping limply to his sides, the exhaustion finally hitting him like a freight train. Start the rewarming process. Now we see if her heart remembers how to beat, and if her brain is still in there. For the next 2 hours, they slowly raised Marina's core temperature. Evander stood in the corner of the OR, refusing to leave, watching the monitors as if he could force her heart to beat through willpower alone. At 34 degrees Celsius, the flat line on the EKG monitor suddenly hitched. A jagged spike appeared, then another. We have sinus rhythm, the anesthesiologist announced. Heart is beating on its own. Pressures are stabilizing. Evander closed his eyes and let out a long, ragged breath. He had fixed the plumbing. But as he looked at the deep purple bruises on his wrists, he knew the real battle, the battle for Marina's mind, and the battle for his own hands had only just begun. 14 hours later, The surgical ICU was bathed in the pale, unforgiving light of a rainy Sunday morning. Chief Edmund Sterling sat in a plastic chair outside room 4, his tailored suit completely ruined, his silver hair unkempt. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years overnight. He held a small, black USB flash drive in his trembling hands. It was the drive Captain Miller had pulled from Marina's purse at the crash site. The ledger. The proof of his absolute corruption. He had it back. His empire was safe. But as he looked through the glass window at his wife, surrounded by ventilators and a dozen IV drips, the victory tasted like ash. The ICU doors swung open. Evander walked in. He was out of his scrubs, wearing a hospital-issue sweatshirt and sweatpants. Both of his forearms were heavily wrapped in compression bandages and rigid splints to stabilize the damaged nerves. Edmund stood up immediately. "Dr. Cole, how is she?" Evander looked at the chief of police with an expression of absolute, unadulterated contempt. "Physically, the graft is holding. Her heart is strong," Evander said, his voice cold. "But she was without brain perfusion for 58 minutes. We are going to lift the paralytics and take her off the ventilator now. We will know in a few minutes if the woman you love is still in that body or if she's gone forever." Edmund swallowed hard. "Dr. Cole, what happened to you last night? I can't apologize enough. That officer acted completely outside of protocol. He will be dealt with." "Save it, Edmund." Evander cut him off, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I know who she is. I know she's your wife. And I know about the black SUV that ran her off the road. The paramedics found police-issue paint transfer on her bumper. You sent your own dogs after her, didn't you?" Edmund flinched as if he had been struck. "You don't understand the pressures of this city." "I understand that you built a cage to trap the innocent," Evander snarled. "And last night, you trapped yourself in it. You almost murdered your own wife." Before Edmund could respond, Gemma poked her head out of the ICU room. "Evander, Chief Sterling, she's breathing on her own. We pulled the tube. She's waking up." Edmund shoved past Evander, practically sprinting into the room. Marina Sterling lay in the bed, her skin pale, monitors beeping in a steady, reassuring rhythm. Her eyelids fluttered, fighting against the heavy sedation. Slowly, agonizingly, they opened. She blinked at the harsh ceiling lights. She looked at Gemma, then at Evander, and finally, her gaze settled on Edmund. "Marina," Edmund choked out, falling to his knees beside the bed. He reached out to take her hand, but he stopped, terrified he might break her. Tears streamed down his face. "Marina, thank God. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. It was a mistake, an accident." Marina's eyes were cloudy, but as she looked at her husband, the fog began to clear. Recognition sparked. Then, a profound, heart-wrenching sadness settled over her features. She was neurologically intact. "Edmund," she whispered, her voice raspy and weak from the breathing tube. "I have it," Edmund said desperately, pulling the black flash drive from his pocket and holding it up for her to see. "I have the drive. Miller got it from your car. I'm going to destroy it right now. I'll resign today. We'll leave Sunfield. We'll go anywhere you want. It's over. We can start again." Marina looked at the flash drive. A small, tragic smile touched her lips. She weakly turned her head toward Evander. "Dr. Cole," she whispered. "I'm here, Mrs. Sterling," Evander said softly, stepping to the other side of the bed. "Thank you," she breathed. Then she turned her eyes back to her husband. The sadness vanished, replaced by the fierce, uncompromising iron of an investigative journalist who had finally caught her prey. "Edmund," Marina said, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "You really think, after 20 years of marriage, you think I'm that stupid?" Edmund froze. "What?" "The flash drive. In my purse." Marina closed her eyes, exhausted by the effort of speaking. It was a decoy, a blank drive filled with grocery lists. The color rapidly drained from Edmund's face. "Marina, what did you do?" "I knew you'd track my car," she whispered. "I knew you'd send Miller, the real ledgers, the offshore accounts, the prison kickbacks. I uploaded them to a secure server yesterday afternoon." "No." Edmund backed away from the bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. "No, no, no." I sent a scheduled email to the State Attorney General and the FBI field office. Marina continued, a single tear escaping the corner of her eye. It was set to send at midnight, unless I logged in to cancel it. I didn't cancel it, Edmund. Edmund looked at the clock on the ICU wall. It was 9 a.m. on Saturday. The files had been with the FBI for 9 hours. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors of the surgical ICU crashed open. 4 men in dark windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow letters FBI strode into the room, followed closely by the state attorney. 2 of the agents immediately flanked Edmund. Chief Edmund Sterling, the lead agent said, his voice echoing like a judge's gavel in the quiet room. You are under arrest for federal racketeering, corruption, conspiracy to commit murder, and violation of civil rights under the color of law. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Edmund looked at his wife. She turned her head away, unable to watch the man she once loved be destroyed by his own hubris. As the cold steel handcuffs ratcheted tightly around Edmund's wrists, the satisfying, heavy click echoed in the room. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. He simply stared at the floor as he was led out of the hospital, stepping directly into the devastating, inescapable trap of his own making. 3 months later, the heavy iron gates of the Blackgate Private Penitentiary slammed shut with a deafening, metallic crash. It was a maximum security facility located deep in the sweltering swamplands 50 miles south of the city. In the intake processing room, former Chief of Police Edmund Sterling stood shivering in his underwear. He was stripped of his tailored Italian suits, his silver hair buzzed close to his scalp. He looked small, fragile, and utterly terrified. A gruff, uncaring guard tossed a harsh, orange canvas jumpsuit onto the concrete bench next to him. Put it on, inmate 8472, the guard barked. Edmund pulled the rough fabric over his shoulders. He looked up at the guard tower through the reinforced window. The irony was a physical weight on his chest. This was the exact prison conglomerate he had partnered with. These were the exact cells he had filled with thousands of innocent people caught in his iron net to line his own pockets. Now, the state had seized his assets, frozen his offshore accounts, and the judge had sentenced him to 25 years without the possibility of parole. He was a disgraced cop in a prison filled with the very men he had wrongfully put there. His survival rate was statistically 0. He had built his own tomb. Meanwhile, back in Sunfield, another cage was closing. Former Officer Spencer Vance sat at the defense table in the crowded Sunfield Superior Courtroom. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit provided by his public defender. Spencer was sweating profusely, his hands trembling as he stared at the judge. The trial had been a media circus. The dashboard camera footage from Spencer's cruiser had been leaked to the press. The entire city had watched, horrified, as Spencer brutally assaulted Dr. Evander Cole, ignoring his pleas, destroying his phone, and leaving the chief's wife to die on an operating table just to secure a bogus arrest quota. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours. Will the defendant please rise? The judge asked, his voice dripping with contempt. Spencer stood, his knees knocking together. He looked back at the gallery. It was packed with citizens from the South Sector, the people he had terrorized for years. There was no sympathy in their eyes. Spencer Vance, the judge began, adjusting his glasses. In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a profound, malicious abuse of authority. You acted not as a guardian of the peace, but as a violent predator. You nearly cost a woman her life, and you jeopardized the career of one of this state's finest surgeons simply to stroke your own fragile ego. You are a disgrace to the badge you once wore. Spencer swallowed hard, staring at the floor. On the counts of aggravated assault under the color of law, kidnapping, and severe civil rights violations, the judge struck his gavel, the sound cracking like thunder. I sentence you to 15 years in the state penitentiary. Remand the prisoner into custody. 2 bailiffs immediately stepped forward. They didn't gently ask Spencer to turn around. One bailiff grabbed Spencer aggressively by the shoulder, spinning him around and slamming him chest first into the heavy oak defense table. "Hey, take it easy," Spencer yelped in shock. "Shut your mouth and stop resisting," the bailiff sneered, echoing Spencer's own horrific words. The bailiff violently wrenched Spencer's arms behind his back, ratcheting a pair of heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. The metal bit deeply into Spencer's skin. Spencer was dragged out of the courtroom, his eyes wide with a terror he had only ever inflicted on others. He was thrown into the back of a claustrophobic, cages-in transport van. As the heavy steel doors slammed shut, sealing him in the dark, the engine roared to life. Spencer Vance finally understood the horrifying, helpless reality of the concrete cage. Across the city, in the quiet sanctuary of his downtown loft, Dr. Evander Cole sat at his grand piano. The late afternoon sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. Evander took a deep breath. His forearms were still wrapped in light athletic tape, but the heavy splints were gone. The physical therapy had been agonizing, pushing his pain tolerance to the absolute limit every single day. Slowly, deliberately, Evander raised his hands and placed his long, dark fingers on the ivory keys. He closed his eyes and pressed down. A clear, beautiful C major chord echoed through the loft. The fine motor control wasn't completely perfect yet. There was still a lingering numbness in his pinky fingers. But he could feel the keys. He could feel the tension. He began to play Chopin. The music was a little slower than before, a little more deliberate, but it was filled with an overwhelming, profound sense of gratitude. The iron net had been officially abolished by the new interim mayor. The checkpoints were gone. The South Sector was breathing again. And just yesterday, Marina Sterling had been discharged from a rehabilitation facility, walking out on her own 2 feet, her mind sharp and her heart beating strong. Evander let the final, lingering note of the sonata fade into the silence of his loft. He looked down at his million-dollar hands. They were scarred, they were battered, but they were unbroken. They were ready to save lives again. True justice has a memory, and hubris is the most flawless architect of our own destruction. Chief Edmund Sterling and Officer Spencer Vance built their power on the suffering of the innocent, believing their badges made them untouchable. But the universe has a brutal way of balancing the scales, turning the very traps they set for others into the cages that lock them away forever. Meanwhile, Dr. Evander Cole proved that true strength isn't found in a weapon or a title, but in the unwavering resilience of a spirit dedicated to saving lives, even when the world tries to break your hands. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat and made you believe in hard karma, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this incredible tale of justice and resilience with your friends, and hit subscribe to join our community for more intense, dramatic stories that deliver unforgettable plot twists and powerful moral impacts. Let us know in the comments below, what was the most satisfying moment of karma for you?